Broadcasting live from our studio in Boston, Solutions Review is proud to showcase Object First in the Solution Spotlight, a unique online event for industry professionals.
I'm Doug Atkinson here at Solutions Review, and welcome to the Solution Spotlight featuring Object First, and focused on how to become ransomware proof with OOTB, out-of-the-box immutability. Immutable storage is a digital fortress, effectively protecting against ransomware threats. Making data unalterable prevents malicious encryption, ensuring that organizations can swiftly recover without bending to ransomware demands. So today, we'll be taking a deep dive into OOTB by Object First and see how it delivers secure, simple, and powerful backup storage purpose-built for Veeam. OOTB helps Veeam admins implement a zero-trust data resilience architecture for unbreakable backup and recovery. And to walk you through the OOTB solution is Anthony Cusimano, Technical Marketing Director and Solution Evangelist at Object First. Anthony, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Doug. It's great to be here.
Well, I'm glad you're here. The subject is, incredibly well searched at Solutions Review, and certainly one that a lot of people are very eager to learn more about. But before we get into all that, you're a pretty interesting guy. You've got a podcast. You're an evangelist. Tell us a little bit more about how you've spent the last decade or so in technology.
Yeah, thanks, Doug. It's been wild. It doesn't feel like a decade plus, but it has been. I started as a developer. I was an engineer for quite a few years, and I'll just be honest with you, I wasn't very good at it. So I started to look at other ways that I could keep my focus on technology and love of the tech, but not spend all day writing code, which, is great for some, but was not for me. So quickly found my way into the world of sort of technical evangelism and getting people excited about technology, which is what I love. And it's just a natural fit. So now I find myself always just gushing about technology with folks like yourself, and it's great.
Yeah, well, I know we actually have enjoyed your evangelism in the past at an Insight Jam a few years ago, and certainly would look forward to having you in some more of our Insight Jam panels as we go forward. But I'm going to turn the floor over to you and let you take it from here. I would say that if anybody has any questions or they have anything they'd like to bring up, we'll save all those for the end of this conversation. And I'll have some questions. If you have any questions, I'll keep them here, and we'll have a little Q&A at the end with Anthony. But for now, Anthony, the floor is yours. I'll turn it over to you and let you walk through the presentation today, and I'll connect back with you in a few minutes.
Sounds great. Thanks, Doug. So, as you eloquently mentioned in the intro, we're talking all about Object First and OOTB today. And, we're bold here. We like to make bold statements. So I'm going to start with a big one, which is we're the best storage for Veeam. And over the next, 45 minutes, I'm excited to show all of you why that is true. If you've never heard of Object First before, if this is your first brush with our company, we were founded by the same two founders of Veeam, Ratmir Timoshev and Andrei Baranov, just a few years back. And I'll explain exactly why. So when you look at the market today, and specifically when you look at the market when it comes to backup storage and backup software, there's some recurring trends that are a little bit concerning for, I think, all of us, namely that ransomware made a huge shift in the last few years from targeting our parents and our grandparents to targeting companies. And when they found that companies were paying just exorbitant amounts of money, it became all they focused on. And as they continued to focus on just going for bigger and bigger fish, they found that companies were starting to not fall for these traps, not pay the ransom, because smart companies had backups and they were able to restore and recover from these attacks pretty efficiently and avoid paying that ransom altogether. Now, what happened in the last 5 years is that, again, the ransomware attackers, the bad actors, got smart and said, hey, we're missing out on big payments because we have not targeted the right thing. So they started attacking the backup software and more specifically the backup storage. And that's where you get to this what we're looking at today is 93% of ransomware attacks are attacking backup storage and backup repositories, which is a pretty horrifying prospect, right? Like they're all smart. They're all going after what they know is the last line of defense. And when considering how big most organizations have gotten, just how much data exists in the world today, there is just a plethora of data that any company would have to back up and make use of in a recovery. Because if you can't recover all of it, or if you can't recover the important pieces that make up your business critical applications and infrastructure, then you might as well pay that ransom because you're not going to get back on your best feet. And, the last point, 82% of admins feel like they can't recover their data fast enough. That was also discouraging because even when they had the data, when you look at instances of these big attacks where they take out oil pipelines or hospitals or casinos, they might have the data, but it's just so big and it's so complicated, they can't recover it quick enough. It became very abundant to Ratmir and Andre, the founders of Veeam, that they needed to build something new. So around 5 years ago, they started toying around with the idea of building something that was secure, simple, and powerful, something that worked for the backup admin, specifically the Veeam admin, and we'll talk more about that in a second, but that delivered a solution that was effectively ransomware proof. And I'll show you exactly how we did all of that in a minute. But this was the mindset that they're in today and they were in 5 years ago that kind of led us down the path to why we had to focus on backup storage specifically. And when you consider what customers need, and we're going to talk today about Veeam customers specifically, Veeam being the largest data protection vendor on the planet, we continue to find that, even in cases where they had a ransomware recovery plan, their backup storage was not up to the task of being both secure, simple, and powerful. It's that old adage, we think about fast, cheap, good, pick two. In their case, it was secure, simple, powerful, maybe pick one if you're lucky. There just wasn't a solution that fit all of those things. And, it's no shade to storage vendors. I'll actually elaborate on why we kind of saw this as a venue for us to start up as a company and build our product. When you think about backup storage and storage in general, everyone always falls to DAS, direct attached storage. It's the most common storage type out there. We use it in our laptops. We use it in our servers. We use it everywhere because it's convenient, it's simple, and it's easy. And it is simple and it is powerful. It's a known entity. And unfortunately, the biggest problem with known entities is that first word is that they're known. Anyone can hack and get into a direct attached storage array. It's not something that is securable. It requires additional expertise and environmental security to make it work. And unfortunately, this is the place that many fall in when choosing their storage for backups because it's convenient. It's around. They probably have some storage arrays lying around. They can repurpose and use. It's fast. It does the job. It's easy to use. But that does not work when, like we said before, 93% of attackers are focused specifically on the backup storage. So then we looked at dedupe appliances, and dedupe is great when you need something that is affordable and deep, right? Deduplication, the idea of compressing, replicating or repeating data. Excuse me, had a little bit of a brain moment there. Repeatable data, being able to compress that down, it's a phenomenal technology, and it is great for backup, especially when you're backing up lots and lots of things. The issue is, one, when it comes time to restore, rehydration of that data is incredibly slow because all of your benefit is in the compression, and bringing it back is no easy feat even for the most powerful of computers. So you're never going to have that quick restore. And again, security is variable, right? Like if the dedupe appliance itself has some built-in security, that's great. But is it doing the kind of security that backup data needs, especially when it's 93% of like the smartest attacks on the planet are happening against it? And we just found that it didn't meet that case either. So it's not fast, it's not secure, and arguably it requires some knowledge to be effective, especially in a backup environment. So then lastly, we looked at the hardened Linux repository, which Veeam actually offers their own version of, included with the Veeam data platform, the Veeam hardened repository. These are great, especially when you need something that is just included. It's a pack-in. They're incredibly powerful because they run Linux. So you know that they have the kind of security and power needed to be a backup storage location. The challenge is when you're managing these things yourself, when you, the backup vendor, are solely responsible for the security of your backup storage, That's a lot of additional pressure you probably didn't sign up for when you interviewed for your job. Storage admin used to be its own role in the industry. We've consolidated and squeezed, and we all wear many hats now, but we can't just expect people to become security experts overnight at their storage. And the other challenge here is with all of these, you have to maintain some level of update, management, and maintenance that just doesn't fit in a lot of our schedules, and honestly probably isn't the top priority of a backup admin. Your top priority is backing up your data, not ensuring your storage is up to date. By not doing that, you put yourself at risk, right? Day zero threats, any kind of attack that could have been caught via a latest update or by applying security, turning off SSH. If you're not doing those things and you're not proactively securing these technologies, then you're just as good as not using them, essentially. Because once it's attacked, once it's encrypted or locked out, it's done. Your backups are gone, and you're going to have to pay to get them back. So that's where we came up with the idea of Object First, our company. We wanted to build a storage company that was focused on a single vendor that delivered powerful S3 immutable object storage and purpose-built for a backup environment. And that's where we get OOTB, which stands for Out of the Box Immutability. It's a fun name to say. I know after you hear this, you're going to be walking around your house, cleaning your sinks, and you're going to be thinking, OOTB, why is that in my head? Because it happened to me. When we named our product, it became sticky. But it's sticky in a good way, right? Like, it stands for Out of the Box Immutability, and that is exactly what we deliver. It is a hardened storage appliance. It's on-prem. It delivers object storage. And the second you plug it in and turn it on, and I'll show you this in our demo, it is immutable by default, which is such an advantage for backup admins because every storage type we talked about prior to OOTB requires additional steps to enable that security, where we see ourselves as that first landing zone for data, where it lands and it is secure, it is simple to manage, and it is powerful upon recovery. So let's talk a little bit more about like that first step, right? When you look at a backup environment, you have your backup software. In this case, we're talking about Veeam because we only work for Veeam. It is a choice that we made early on in our development cycle that we wanted to support one backup vendor. And the important thing to note there is that meant that we could dedicate all of our attention to a single target. We know exactly how they send us their data. We know exactly how we need to receive it, and we know exactly how to send it back upon recovery. So we see ourselves as that primary landing zone for Veeam data. We ingest it directly from Veeam via their SOS API that they released in version 12. That stands for Smart Object Storage. It's a little technical, but we'll actually talk a little bit more about that later. It is the best way to ingest data for object storage and to take advantage of some of the features you'll see today. It lands on our Object First OOTB box, and it stays there for as long as you need. You'll set your immutability window, and I'll show you that in the demo, and we'll keep it. We'll keep it immutable. Once their data lands on our box, there is no way you can remove it in any way, shape, or form. No amount of admin privileges, no amount of backend operating system or root privilege, because we don't give them to you. You have no privilege. Your data lands on our box, and we keep it secure for the entirety of the immutability window. And we also see an opportunity to take this and leverage secondary targets as well. So whether you're going to a second OOTB that's in a co-located data center, or you're using one of our numerous Cloud Alliance partners, we're encouraging all Veeam backup admins to reevaluate their storage and see whether or not they're in a truly immutable and secure environment. Now, this is how it works from a, kind of 1, 2, 3, or I guess 3, 2, 1 perspective. But let's talk a little bit more about what we're actually doing. So when it comes to security, our first message we talk about when it comes to OOTB is that OOTB is secure. I already mentioned S3 out of the box immutability. And if you're familiar with cloud storage or object storage, you've heard of S3 before. It is the communications protocol that object storage uses to receive and send data from its storage buckets inside. S3 is a great protocol because it was designed recently and it was designed post ransomware attacks. We already knew the way that bad actors were getting into their system. So when Amazon actually designed S3, they built it with security in mind. So it is a great storage protocol just by default for backup storage. Now, out of the box immutability, like I mentioned earlier, we don't allow our users to effectively turn off object lock. When data lands on our box, it is immutable by default. They can create buckets, and I'll show you this in the demo, where they're able to disable the immutability, but all of the features needed for object lock, for versioning, they're all on, and you cannot turn them off. We'll talk more about that in a second, but the bigger point I want to make here is that second bullet. Hardened storage target was zero access to root. I mentioned this previously, but it bears repeating. When you get an OOTB box and put it in your data center, you are an admin in name only. You have no access to the backend. You have no access to our operating system, no access to root, which means you can't delete anything. You can actually find yourself in an interesting situation where if you don't do the math right and you write too much storage or too much backup to our storage, you can't get the data off, because once it lands in an immutable bucket, it cannot be removed for the entirety of that duration. Some people might see this as a little bit of a trouble point. We see it as an incredible strength, because by limiting your access, you remove the insider breach problem entirely. And we see time and time and again, when it comes to data centers and data storage specifically, insider breach is always the way they get through the most hardened environment. And we'll talk more about security and hardening in just a second. But by removing this access, truly you are able to kind of just sleep and rest easy. Take the peace of mind of, well, if I can't delete the data and I'm the one who owns and paid for this device, then no bad actor will as well. And we further ensure that through continuous third-party testing and validation, as well as taking advantage of some zero trust principles, and specifically the zero trust data resilience architecture, which I'm actually going to take a pause from talking about OOTB and talk just for a minute about zero trust, because it's important that everyone understands what these principles are. In order to understand truly what makes security different in this day and age from security 10 years ago, you have to understand the concept of zero trust. Zero trust is the idea that you are always breached at all times. I'm sure many of you used to hear, if ransomware attacks, and then people in marketing like myself got smart and started saying, it's not a matter of if, but when. And now we just say when ransomware attacks. And we say when because we know, right? Like, there is no avoiding ransomware as a business in a breach type format. They're always going to get through because there's too many technical weak points in all of the solutions we use to prevent any kind of infiltration. So the first principle of zero trust is assume breach at all times. Assume someone's already in your infrastructure, whether it's an insider or a clever hacker or some kind of worm. They made their way in. Now what do you do? And the second part of that is verify explicitly, right? Like, you start introducing MFA, you start requiring account management, you start doing more validation of user accounts, apps, and services. And when they connect to different services, apps, and users, they are who they say they are. And that last point is just that, using least privilege access. I'm going to doubt every single command, every single user is who they say they are and that their intentions are pure. I'm going to wrap all of this up in security protocols, and that's zero trust. Ultimately, it is just paranoia-based security, and it works really well for production apps and infrastructure. But where it didn't quite fit for us was in the backup equation, right? Because that's what's missing from this slide. Zero trust is great when you're talking about, credit card processing, financial information, backup software, backup storage. They're all individual pieces of this attack surface, but we don't really talk about any of that in the messaging here. So that's where we came up with this concept of zero trust data resilience. And this was invented by an individual named Jason Garbus. He works for a firm called Numberline in tandem with Veeam. Now, Veeam, like I mentioned before, the biggest data backup vendor, they came up with this idea that there needs to be more than just zero trust for backup data. Hence why we added the data resilience onto the end. And you'll notice the big differences here is segmentation of backup software and backup storage. By separating these two entities, by having Veeam stand on its own and Object First stand on its own, you've now reduced your blast surface or attack surface significantly just by separating those two things. This has individual user accounts and credentials. Object First has individual user accounts and credentials. The more you segment, just in like that slide I showed a few minutes ago with the Object First in the cloud, the more segmentation you have, the more independent accounts you have, the less likely that breach is going to be able to penetrate every single aspect of your infrastructure. And you can further harden this with multiple resiliency zones. So the resilience zone is just taking that verify explicitly and the segmentation and kind of taking it to the next level of extreme, right? We want to ensure that in those resiliency zones, you're taking advantage of features like zero access. We're verifying every single command and thing that comes through. We're ensuring that that separation that's occurring is not just shared credentials the whole way through. We're really building something that is more resilient in an individual part and piece level versus applying the same security protocol to every individual piece. And lastly, and in my opinion, most importantly, is the immutable backup storage. Immutable means that data can't be changed. So when you're using that immutable backup storage, it means that there is no way that anyone can get into that data, manipulate it, delete it, alter it in any way. It's just viewable. And you can take that to another level too by applying encryption. If you encrypt your data and it lands on immutable storage and it's truly immutable, there is no way a bad actor can get access to it. So I stop talking about OOTP to talk about this just to bring up the fact that we thought about this a lot when we started developing OOTP at Object First. We think about what a good zero trust data resilience architecture looks like, and we see it as such, right? You're separating your production environment from your backup software. We understand that the protocols over here on the left, these are all compromisable, but S3 is not. Like I mentioned before, S3 was built with the idea of security in mind, taking advantage of having your primary data center and your primary object storage target have zero access to root, be immutable by default, have that minimized attack surface, and then having a second copy offsite, because we know hammers exist, disasters exist. An insider can still go unplug the cable. So the more resiliency you have, the more you implement 321, the better it will be for everyone. And I step away from talking about OOTP to talk about this infrastructure because this is where we want to see everyone, regardless of whether they go with Veeam and Object First or whatever choice they make. We do believe that this is the best way to become ransomware resilient in this day and age, considering everything we've said so far. So I'll stop here and basically say zero trust data resilience is security, and it is a requirement for backup software and backup storage moving forward. So I think everyone needs to be a little bit more considerate of this, and that's that. So I will get back to why OOTP is important, but I always find it important just to kind of stop there and explain that as well. So OOTP is secure. It implements zero trust data resilience. We went out of our way to explain that. And that was a lot of complex terms and words. On the other hand, OOTP is incredibly simple. And I am very excited to show all of you just how simple it is in the demo environment. But there is no security expertise required to use this. We did all the work on our end, so you don't have to do it on the back end. It legitimately takes less than 15 minutes to deploy and scale. We say 15 because it's a nice round number, but you could do it in 7. It's absolutely possible. And just to keep things simple and easy, like I mentioned before, updates are hard, especially when you're managing lots of different services. We made it easy. When you update OOTP, you're updating the box, you're updating the operating system, and you're also updating our software. We prioritize and optimize everything for both the security use case as well as keeping things running shipshape and smoothly on the user's end. And OOTP is powerful. So we do some pretty impressive things when it comes to our actual storage on the back end. We wrote our own proprietary object storage code. We made some choices in designing that separate it from the other object storage vendors out there. Specifically getting rid of some features to focus in on specifically the backup use case, and even more specifically, the Veeam use case, which meant that we were able to take advantage of Veeam features and to maximize the way data throughput occurs on our box. So we supercharge instant recovery. When it comes to running multiple VMs on the machine simultaneously, we support 20 VMs per node. We can ingest data at 1 gigabyte per second per node and support up to a 4-node cluster, which means that when it comes to scale, and we do scale, you start with a single node. You add one, you double your throughput, you double your capacity. 3, you triple. 4, it quadruples. So it's pretty exciting from a user perspective of what we've built here, because just like I told you in the beginning, storage is not easy and it is not secure, and oftentimes it's not exactly the most powerful thing. So we've built something that I think is actually exactly what the market needs right now. And rather than show you more slides, I think it's time we show you the actual thing. As you can see here, I'm just in a remote desktop session with a very nicely themed purple and orange desktop here. We got a lot of things going on, but before we get into the actual meat and potatoes, I'm going to show you that setup. I told you could do it in 15 minutes or less. I'm not going to actually do it live because there are sales engineers who are using this lab right now, and if I restart their cluster, they will yell at me. So we recorded a quick video. You'll notice the entire time of this is 2 minutes. I'll skip ahead a few points just because you don't want to see a screen not do anything. But the configuration of OOPI, you plug it in, you connect to our text user interface here, you type in an IP address, you type in any of your network information that is required here, and you do it twice because we have 2 10 gig NICs that comprise our network transfer hardware. So our video demoer here is just typing in the network information. Super exciting stuff for y'all, I know. And he's going to do it a second time with a different IPv4 on the second NIC. Once he's gone through this, he's going to hit enter, and you're going to notice we're going to sit on a screen for a few seconds, and I'll actually fast forward there. But this is the most complicated part of the entire OOPI process. And that's the reason I showed this, right? Like, if you can do this, if you can type in some network information, you can use OOPI. So he's going to type in a host name here. He's going to type it in with all caps and then add a whole bunch of characters because OOPI is exciting. And then we're going to type it in one more time just for the heck of it. And he's going to hit enter. We're going to update the network settings on the machine. And this is where I skip because you don't want to see this for the next minute. It updates the settings. It checks for an update, and it's actually reaching back to our Object First servers for a secure check to make sure that the box and the hardware and the software are all up to date, because we do know that security threats can happen in transit. And we want to make sure that you are always up to date with the latest and greatest. This is important. So here we name the cluster. And the thing to point out here is we're running a single node. You might say, well, why are you naming a cluster if it's a single node? The way we scale is linearly, like I showed you in those slides. By creating the cluster with the first node, it means when you add a second, third, or fourth, you don't have to go through any kind of complicated setup. You simply just add the new IPs and it automatically load balances in the cluster. A super simple equation that means that you get to essentially speed up and increase your capacity with no additional effort required. So that's it. That's the appliance setup in a nutshell. Text user interface, super exciting, I know. Once you go through that, you will go into your web browser. You'll type in that cluster IP that he just defined there, and you land on our dashboard. So this is Object First OOPI. This is our simple little dashboard. You can see exactly how much data we've used here. We have 120 terabytes free. This is a 128 terabyte node that we're in right now. You can get information about the service point, which we'll come back to that in a minute. You can see our disks, our network, how many buckets we have, and you'll also get a little bit of a view of some generic performance. Now, if this was the first time that we'd set this up, we'd actually be prompted to come and create an S3 key. That's the first thing you do when you set up an OOPI and you get past the network configuration. S3 keys, pretty common, but if you're not familiar with object storage, think of an S3 key as essentially the username and password for an object storage account. We can create a key that is just as simple as creating a new key and typing in a name. I'm not going to do that because, as you can see, we already have enough keys in our environment, and just me adding more is not going to help anybody. But you get the access key, you have the user ID, the secret access key is blocked out. It's a security thing, but it's actually not necessary, and you'll see why later. Once you've created your service key or your S3 access key, then you'll be prompted to create an S3 bucket. And an S3 bucket, again, if you're not object storage aware, is just a logical way to separate the 128 terabytes that's offered up by OOPI. Now, you're not going to choose how much size you want in the bucket. That's all managed by us. you're just going to choose what you want to call it. So we've got lots of different buckets in here. I'll draw your attention to, we have a capacity tier. If we go into our next page, there is a ransomware proof tier. We're going to keep our eye on that one as we go through this demo. And we've got a few more. And you'll notice we just show basic things like how much backup data is in there, how much S3 data, the total amount. We're not using all that much, which is fine. We're gonna write some more data during this demo here. And once you've done that, once you've created your bucket, you created your S3 key. If I just click out of this so we get rid of our text, you create your bucket, you create your S3 key, you're done. You've actually done all of the things that you could possibly do with OOTB from a backup perspective. Now, yes, you could come into settings and you could set up your MFA credentials. You could, install an SSL certificate, disable SSH access, which we always recommend, maybe set up your notifications. But in actuality, you're going to do that one time, if even. Creating that S3 key, creating that S3 bucket, you've now completed your Object First OOTB demo, and we're done here. And truly, we are done with the OOTB portion of that demo. I don't think it took 15 minutes again, and I was belaboring points. You can rip through this if you want to, and that just leads to why we're so excited about OOTB simplicity. Everything you see on the screen here is incredibly secure from that Zero Trust data resilience perspective. We've checked all our boxes, we've dotted all our I's, crossed all our T's to ensure that you can't, from that textual user interface, get out into a shell. From here, there's no way, if I came in and I tried to delete, let's go into that ransomware proof bucket and let's just try and delete it and give the SEs an Object First a scare. Now it said only an empty bucket can be deleted. So when I click this, and it's going to run through the process here, it's going to throw up an error because we have immutable data in there. We can't delete that. So like I said before, we've gone out of our way to secure this. We've gone out of our way to make it simple. But what you haven't seen is the power. And to do that, we're going to pop over in Veeam. So this is Veeam Backup and Replication version 12.1, I believe. Yes, 12.1.156. If I could read, I wouldn't have to believe. Now, if you're familiar with Veeam, that's awesome. If you're not, this is just a way to back up your data. It's a great way to do it. It is a nice interface that gets you lots of different options and features to really just ingest data effectively and performantly. But to see how OOTB works, we have to first start in our backup infrastructure. And we're going to look at our backup repositories. Now you'll notice all these blue buckets here. We create those S3 buckets in OOTB, we can add them into Veeam. Keeping with our theme of ransomware proof, we're going to click our immutable bucket here, and I'm actually going to show you exactly how we configure this. So if I go into properties, you'll see essentially the same wizard workflow that you go through if you were adding a bucket for the first time. So you set a name, you give it a description, you click next. Here you type in your S3 access key. So those keys that you had to create in that first step of the OOTB setup, that is what you input here. And that's all you need from a credentials perspective to connect OOTB to Veeam. You also type in your service point, which that's just grayed out because we've typed it in once and once was enough. And our connection mode is direct. Now, in the slides, I mentioned that SOS API, the Smart Object Storage API that Veeam added in version 12. Direct connection is the fastest way to ingest object storage data via Veeam. And they released this feature last year. And I call that out because when they released this feature, we came out of stealth as a company and released our product. We only can be communicated with via that SOS API, which gives us additional security as well as additional performance. Again, we are purpose-built for Veeam, and we see this as an incredible way to ensure that Veeam users have simple, secure, and powerful storage at their fingertips at all times. You type in your credentials, you click next, and this is probably the most important screen you will see in the Veeam part of the demo. You'll see right here, make recent backups immutable for 14 days. Now, one, I can't uncheck that. Why is that? Because Veeam has gone out of their way to say, hey, if you've made the data immutable, you can't unmake it immutable. Now, even if, let's say Veeam made a mistake and they said that we're going to turn this off, your backup's not going to be immutable for 14 days. Any data that you put on OOTB would still be kept immutable for that 14-day window. So that's one additional security feature that we're just providing on our end. If there was a way to break it, it's still going to stay immutable on our box. A little bit of additional encouragement there. If we shrunk the days, let's say, oh, I'm smart. I'm going to take this down to 1 day, and in 24 hours, I'm going to delete that data. It would not change the backup chain. It would only change from the backup chain moving forward. If I add additional days, it's going to increase the backup chain, how long it is kept immutable for. So both Veeam and Object First have thought about this from a perspective of insider attack and ensuring that once the data is written and it is immutable, it cannot be unwritten. And I'll prove that even further beyond just trying to delete a bucket in a minute. So you run through this process, you'll hit next just 2 more times because that's what you do. But that's all it takes to add an Object First bucket into Veeam. Again, very simple. 2 things, the S3 key, the service point, and the bucket immutability window. 3 pieces of information. I'm not gonna change this because it's good the way it is. Now, on the backup side, we've added our storage. Let's run a backup. So we've got core servers immutable for 14 days. Let's just take a look at this backup job. Open it up here. And again, if you're familiar with Veeam, this is just like riding a bike. You'll never forget how to do it. But if you're not, this is how you select what gets backed up and sent to OOTB. So we give it a name. We've selected some virtual machines here. These are all just virtual machines in our lab. You just add as many as you want or remove them. It's up to you. Here's the OOTB part. In the storage tab, you're going to select we're going to do our OOTB immutable Object First immutable bucket. That's the one we were just looking at just a moment ago. And you'll notice there's a retention policy here of 30 days. And if you're wondering, well, what happens if the retention policy is less than the immutability? Well, in that case, you would have data that could technically be deleted. Well, I guess it theoretically could be deleted, but technically cannot be, because even though its retention policy is up, the immutability window is what we default to when it comes to deletion. We don't look at retention at all when data lands on OOTB. Immutability is the only thing that matters. And again, that's just another way of ensuring that any sort of crafty attacker that might be in the ecosystem cannot access our data. So you select your Object First immutable bucket, you click next. We have a second site. We're using an offsite target here for our backup, keeping it there for 14 days. We always recommend 3-2-1. Even though we consider ourselves ransomware-proof backup storage, we cannot encourage our users enough to consider a second OOTB or using a cloud storage target for their secondary backup. And we'll choose our credentials as well as which policies we want for application-aware processing. This is for the granular recovery of data if you wanted to pull individual parts and pieces. We put it on a schedule. It runs at 9 a.m. every weekday, but I'm going to actually take us a step further than that. I'm going to cancel this. I'm going to kick this off right now. Just going to run an active full job for you. Now you'll notice here, we've got 2 gigabytes per second speed that occurred on the last job that ran. We're going to let this run. I'm not going to let you sit through and watch a progress bar go, but we'll come back in a minute and ensure that everything is working properly as it starts to back up these VMs inside of our lab through Veeam to our OOTB device. Now, while that runs, I'm going to prove to you that you cannot delete data on OOTB. So I'm going to go over to Cloudberry Explorer, which is just a great little S3 tool. If you've ever needed a way to access S3 or object storage data, this is an easy enough way to do it. On the right, I'll draw your attention to our little source over here, Object First OOTB. Now, we've just taken one of the S3 keys that we created. We've plugged it into Cloudberry, and it can automatically see OOTB as our object storage repository here. Let's come back into root. So from root, we see all the same buckets we saw in our OOTB UI. And we know we're using that ransomware proof one. We're writing a backup job right now. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to come back up to the top here. And I'm going to go inside of this. And I'm going to just try and delete our Veeam folder, because that's where all the backups go. All of the backups, even our active one happening right now, is in there. So I'm just going to try and remove this. And you'll see a green arrow, which might seem dangerous. It's enumerating the folder. It's going for the ransomware-proof Veeam. But if you look over here on the right, you'll notice right now we're at 0 bytes, 0%. It will eventually time out. But what it is trying to do is look through this folder and find something that it can delete. Because we have immutable data in there, we cannot touch this, even from a third party. Again, this is just us being overly cautious and aware where we have the S3 keys. It's in a third-party application. It's not going through Veeam. We're still preventing deletion. And that is a testament to the combination of S3 object lock working on our box, the immutable data that's written to it, and our focus on ensuring that once data is written, it cannot be unwritten for the entire duration of the window that is set. So it'll spin on this forever. I won't torture the application. I'll go ahead and cancel it. But that's just further proof that once data lands on our box, it can't get off. And again, you can find yourself in a situation where you put too much on there and then you're calling our support asking for help. And we're like, oh, well, just wait for it to expire. And then we'll do some math and figure out how to shrink that backup chain for the next set. But that, again, is working in your favor to ensure that data never gets removed. So if we come back to our little view over here, I'm actually going to go into our monitoring panel. So you can see we've started to kick off some data movement in here because we're running that backup job. In monitoring, you can get all kinds of information, including network throughput, disk I/O, CPU usage, S3 API operations, anything you could ever want to know will be here. I think more interesting than that is actually our disks view. But before we get there, just to kind of show you, you can get a node view and understand like what's going on from a hardware perspective. You can get a networking view where we can see both of our 10 gig NICs ingesting data over here. And then there's our disk view. If I expand this, it's always interesting when a backup job is going because we can see real-time read-write speeds on all of our disks. So right now, you'll notice we have quite a few disks that are ingesting data. But the one I'll call attention to is this one right here, our 1.6 terabyte NVMe, the cache, which is now at 0 bytes because I wasn't fast enough. The NVMe basically acts as our buffer. When we communicate to Veeam via that SOS API, every piece of data that comes across, oh, there it goes again, it's starting to spin up, will land on the cache first. Now, once it lands in the cache, our backend object storage software will actually take the data from there and then disseminate it to these 11 16 terabyte RAID 6 disks. Actually, I should say these 10, because one of these disks is a hot spare. It's this one that has the 0 and 0. Now, I did say RAID 6, so you can lose up to 2 disks before you lose any amount of data, which is why we include the hot spare, right? If you lose a disk, you just pop the new one into the slot of the old one, and we'll automatically get it back to parity with RAID 6. And down here at the bottom, you can also see we have 2 SSDs that contain our operating system information. Again, keeping things redundant. That's why we have 2 disks. They're in a mirror RAID array, just ensuring that no matter what goes wrong from a hardware perspective, your data is protected in addition to the software or the attacker perspective. So I show this is all to say, we've really thought about the way data moves, the way data lands inside an environment, and how to handle it to the best of our ability. So if we come back over to Veeam, we can see it's still working through some VMs. We did hit a throughput. So right now we're at 554, and that's probably because we're only backing up one thing at a time. But when we have multiple VMs being backed up in progress, we hit that 1 gigabyte per second read speed because we're maximizing the throughput on those 2 NICs, and we're ingesting directly to that cache. And that is how we back up data to OOTB. Super simple. I'm going to continue to let this run as we close out the demo here, but that is how Object First works with Veeam. Now, again, just finishing up on the dashboard here, it is incredibly simple and easy to use. If you are running through this for the first time, I would expect it to take you less than 20 minutes if you're Veeam familiar to get this entire thing configured and working in your environment. And the good news is once you have done that, that data will be kept secure and preserved and immutable for the entirety of its life that you set it for. And that's Object First OOTB, and that's the demo. So happy to be able to share that with y'all. And I know we have some questions, so I think I'd love to answer some.
Well, I have a question because I'm old, and I was wondering as I was listening to this, is the immutable backup effectively a replacement for old school tape? I mean, is this kind of where we are? Is this kind of almost a Back to the Future approach to
I love that
protection?
analogy. Because it is funny, right? Like tape is immutable by definition, and many still use it. I mean, it can burn up in a pretty terrible fire, but once it's removed and it's put in a vault somewhere, you cannot change that tape. We see this as not just a replacement for tape, but it is like an evolution, because tape has always suffered from being a linear way to write data to a very slow medium. UTB being disk based, the issue with disks is, unlike tape, they're plugged in, they can be written to, they're magnetic. There's many ways you could break them. And, I showed in the demo the various disk setup because we do realize disks break. We do realize that there are crafty people out there who can manipulate data on disk. So we've kind of gone out of our way to overly secure the hardware to create a tape experience without any of the tape frustration. So I love that question because, one, it's never been asked before. So I always love a new question. But two, it's a good way to think about it, right? Like, this is the evolution. You should not be writing data to tape anymore, especially if you're a large enterprise, because you're just never going to get the data back as quick as you need to. That's why we've created this kind of solution, is we know there's an expediency that's required for ransomware recovery.
Yeah. So is this it? I mean, is this ransomware proof? This is the state of the art, and essentially, the game is over.
Well, I'd like to think so. I think everyone at Object First would like to think so too. Now, obviously, I have to give the caveats, right? There will always be the day zeros. There will always be those clever cats who figure out a new way to get in. This is why we talk about zero trust data resilience, 3-2-1, being able to segment your environment, having multiple landing zones. I'm not as concerned about UTB being ransomware proof as concerned as I am about UTB being, located on a beach somewhere near Florida, right? I live in Florida. We get hurricanes every year. It floods. And if there's one thing that any hardware hates, it's water. It's always important to consider the worst case scenario, right? If you have a power outage, a network outage, you get hit by a terrible flood, there's nothing that UTB is going to be able to help you with there, especially in a case of recovery. But from a ransomware proof perspective, we are continuously third-party testing this with outside agencies that will give us any gamut of tests to ensure that we are basically cashing every check that I've put out with my mouth today. And we also, we focus on specifically that one use case of keeping data immutable, keeping it secure at all costs, and ensuring that even the most crafty person couldn't get in. So an example I always like to give is when it comes to, calling our customer support. A lot of bad actors that are trying to get into the largest, topmost money-making enterprises, they will call customer support and pretend to be a customer. That's a great way to get information, especially if you can spoof that human being that you're pretending to be. Now, with us and other smart vendors, they're turning to more validation that will occur when those calls happen. It's not just, hey, I'm Anthony, I live in Florida. Okay, here's access to our support, and here we're going to give you some information about your account or whatnot. We actually validate on both ends. So if you call our support person has to validate with you that they are who they say they are, and you have to validate with them that you are who you say you are. And it's all kind of proprietary in the back end, and I'm not going to share all of that with you today, but we went out of our way to be paranoid in the best way to make sure that the hardware, the software, and the personal angle isn't compromised when it comes to ransomware.
Yeah, this is fascinating to me. I particularly am intrigued by the business process you need to start thinking about with regard to how long you're going to maintain immutability effectively, or what are you hearing and seeing with regard to current clients in terms of how they're coming up to speed around that? I mean, there's this kind of instinct to want to keep everything forever, but obviously that doesn't scale in this particular model.
It does not. And, we're a relatively new company. We just had our first birthday, February 14th. When I started over 2 years ago now, some of the first prospects we were talking to in our beta had never worked with immutable storage before. And it was fun because we were doing math, like real time. Okay, you have 74 terabytes of data. If that's your full backup and you're going to a 128 box and you keep your data on this box for 2 months and you have 30% change, you're going to max that out. You're not going to be able to write all of that. So we need to shrink the window, or we need to add a second node into your cluster to figure it out. And the math is always fun. Well, if you're a math nerd, the math is fun. If you're not, it's nightmarish, and make sure to have a calculator with you. But it has been an interesting conversation that we've had with a lot of our customers is they haven't really thought about this. A lot of folks haven't thought about how long do I actually keep my data? And, we talk about OOTB as that primary landing zone. You have to have multiple places you keep it, whether it's tape or it's cloud. There needs to be a long-term place where you keep things for longer than your 2-month immutability on OOTB, and then you retire it off for compliance reasons, right? Like, this goes beyond just attacks and security. There are legal and governmental reasons to keep data for years on end. So we always recommend, as a ransomware focused company and a security focused company, data that lands on OOTB is the data you need to recover when ransomware hits. If it's not useful in a ransomware attack, get it off OOTB. Either shrink your window and focus more on that new, fresh data and keep a good latest copy, or expand your cluster so you can keep a little bit more, but don't keep the stuff that you're never going to restore except for a legal or compliance reason, because that's not what we're about. That's not why we're here. We're here to keep your new data fresh and ready to recover at a moment's notice.
Yeah, it's interesting. I know you're in Florida, but we're up here in the Boston area, and I know your headquarters is just up the street here in Beverly. Say somebody is interested, has seen the demo, wants to learn more. What's the path for them at this point? I mean, I know there's a request for a demo on the site. There's an actual how to buy button, which I appreciate. But you say somebody reaches out, we've kind of been the gateway drug to learn more about that through this event. What can they expect in terms of how that engagement might begin?
So a unique thing about Object First as a company is we don't do direct sales at all. So if you click that how to buy button, you're gonna find yourself in a list looking for who's your Veeam partner, because we only sell to Veeam, or we only work with Veeam. We sell exclusively through Veeam partners and resellers. So we try to keep that process really easy. You already have the relationship if you're using Veeam today with a Veeam reseller. It's going to be the same person who's going to be talking to you about Object First and OOTB. If you want to learn more, the easiest way to do that is just go to our website, objectfirst.com. We have a lot of great resources there, both educationally as well as some thought leadership from folks like myself, where we talk about things like ZTDR and get a little bit more into the weeds on what good security is, even beyond just your backup software and backup storage. But going there is a great place to learn about OOTB and Object First and what we're doing as a company. And I'll also shout out every Tuesday, right before this show, we do a live stream on YouTube and LinkedIn. It's called Zero Gravity Live, but it's folks like myself and a few other Object First experts that get on and talk about all things security, technology, and things beyond even OOTB, because we do realize, education is not just for one slice of professionalism. You have to know security about everything. You have to know about AI. You have to know about all of the things that are changing that we're constantly struggling to keep up with. So every Tuesday at 11 a.m. EST, we do run a show that is purely kind of just an educational hangout where we talk about these kind of things. But I do recommend going to our website, and you can get all that information there. It's objectfirst.com, and it's a great place to go if you need the best storage for Veeam.
Yeah, and again, we always encourage everybody to learn more, to go to Object First and check out everything that they have, and certainly while they're new, this is actually a great time to begin to engage companies like this, where you can really get in at the beginning of how they're thinking about things, and really focus in on how best to deliver for your particular situation. I'm curious, with regard to your partnership for Veeam, speaking of being down in Florida, the Veeam On 24 event is happening in June 3rd in Fort Lauderdale. Are you planning on being down there?
I am planning on being there. I'm actually really excited because as an Orlando native, I'm going to ride the Brightline, which is our new hyperrail, directly from Orlando to Fort Lauderdale, which is exciting for me. But I think more exciting for Object First is the fact that we will be there. We're going to have the presence we've always had there. This will be our third year at VeeamON and my third time going. So it's going to be a good time. We've got more going on at this event this year than we've ever had before. If you are going to be at the event, swing by our booth, because every day throughout the day, I will be running trivia, and we've got some really good questions. I've vetted them all. They're fun. They're good. And if you win, you get I think it's a Star Wars Lego land speeder. So even if you don't need the best storage for Veeam, everyone needs a Star Wars Lego land speeder in their life. So swing by the booth.
I love it. So how should people be thinking about this, and who should be thinking about this? I mean, everybody obviously of any consequence has something, right? And as you said, the attacks are relentless, and obviously they're probably well aware of that. And everything we see here at Solutions Review is the attacks are only going to get more sophisticated, particularly at the individual user level and some of the vulnerabilities that you described earlier. But who in the organization should be thinking about this sort of thing, and how should they be thinking about it in terms of just practical advice?
That's an excellent question. And I kind of fall back on myself for the answer is, I work at a start. Object First is a startup. We started when I was at the company. I think we had less than 4 United States employees to start with. And I wore many hats. And in that time, I learned to really empathize with specifically the Veeam admin and the Veeam user, because as I started to talk with them, I realized they're just like me. They're wearing way too many hats. And unfortunately, they're not scaling the way that a startup does scale. I think we're at 150 employees now. So I don't have to wear as many hats, but they do. And that's the challenge. They're being asked to do so much more work. So for me, it's a matter of, what is your frustration with what you're doing today? And what is your confidence that what you're doing is enough to recover? And again, it's a little bit of math. If you look at your environment, you look at your backup infrastructure, and you consider that zero trust data resilience architecture I showed you, and you said, oh, we're not quite there yet. Like, what's the confidence that you could actually recover that data? How long would it take? On average, they say that a ransomware recovery takes 3 weeks, and that's a good number, which to me is horrifying, because I just think about a business being down for 3 weeks, and that seems devastating monetarily. Then the downside, like the other end of that, is 3 months is kind of where the worst case scenarios fall in, and businesses just can't be down for 3 months. So what is your confidence that you can actually recover with your current setup the way it is today? When was the last time you tested it? You ran through that recovery, and how long did it take? And then what's your frustration? You've gone through the exercise, you've tested it, I'm 90% sure we'll get out okay, but is managing it, is continuing to keep up with this something that is acceptable to you? Is that comfortable? Is that what you want to keep doing? Is this the job you signed up for? And if you can ask yourself those questions and you can confidently answer them, then I would say, you're in a good spot. But if there is hesitation, if there is concern, then it's time to think about maybe upgrading your backup storage or looking at how you can improve that environment and make it more zero trust data resilient, because we don't want to see anyone fail, whether they go with Object First and Veeam or not. We don't want to see ransomware win, because when attackers win, everybody loses. It's just a matter of asking those questions and taking the time to find those answers.
Yeah, it's wild out there. It's getting more and more threatening by the minute, and layer in AI and all the other sophisticated attacks that can come at basically everybody within your organization, and the paths are remarkably plentiful for bad actors. So peace of mind. That's what I wish for everyone in 2024 and beyond. This has been great, Anthony. Very much appreciated. Great presentation. Thanks for being on. We very much look forward to keeping track of Object First and Veeam and covering the VeeamON events all throughout the year. But look forward to talking to you again in the future, but best of luck for the rest of the year.
Thank you, Doug. It's great.
So there you have it. Another solution in our spotlight. We want to thank Anthony and Object First for their presentation, and we appreciate your attendance as well. Until next time, I'm Doug Atkinson here at Solutions Review. Thanks for watching.